It went downhill fast. Yo, what's up? It's someone that's no one, and welcome back to today's report. Today's report was sent in by an anonymous user where they took 700 milligrams of diphenhydramine. And here's the full report details. Alright, we got quite the diphenhydramine report today. This is pretty much a disaster trip that ends up in the hospital. Homie gets caught up by his parents pretty much right away after trying to reach the 700 club. And of course, they have to go to the hospital. There's a lot of delirium in this trip. A lot of delirious hallucinations pop up, some kind of creepy, but by the way he describes this, it's almost kind of comical, especially when he's trying to deal with everything in the hospital. At the same time, this is super dangerous and a life-changing experience. And it does serve as a warning for anyone messing with recreational diphenhydramine use. Either way, I'm sure you'll enjoy this one, so without further ado, let's dive right into this. Hi someone that's no one. The following is a trip report and brief explanation of anticholinergic substances. I hope it's not too long to read. Smiley face. Please let me know if you have any further questions. Thanks. Anonymous. Trip report begins here. Let me just start off by saying I do not condone using diphenhydramine to get high. People call it a trip, and I can attest it is nowhere close to anything you'd expect on an actual real trip, such as psychedelics. A lot of people also don't know how DPH actually works in the brain, so allow me to explain. Diphenhydramine blocks a very important brain chemical called acetylcholine. Acetylcholine is crucial for your brain to process basic things, such as memory, attention, vision, and senses, and even muscle control. When you block acetylcholine, you block brain signals, and in high doses, your brain can't fully comprehend what is happening, and it basically fills in the blanks with realistic and other terrifying hallucinations. The medical term for you science nerds is acute anticholinergic toxidrome, which basically means anti-acetylcholine poisoning. Here's my report. I hope you are both entertained and informed about the very real dangers of this drug. It was a Thursday night, and I'd been taking DPH for a few weeks prior, after experiencing some absolutely mind-melting hallucinations, and was attempting to reach/join the 700 Club. For those of you who don't know, it's a term for people who have taken 700 plus milligrams DPH. So I went to the store, got a hold of a bottle of Benadryl liquid, a bottle of Benadryl 25 milligram tablets, and a box of Unisum. I chugged the liquid Benadryl, arrived home, and began popping the pink pills. A little while later, probably around 7:30 or 8 p.m., I started to feel the effects. I became overcome with the visual drowsiness, mild body load, and sedation, but something was a little off. I suddenly realized I was feeling nauseated, and rushed to the bathroom, only to half deliriously puke up what I can only assume was half-digested pills. I stumbled around in the bathroom for a minute or two, then proceeded to make my way around the house, not even remembering that I just vomited everywhere. I made the mistake of walking downstairs, and my mom saw me and immediately began asking me about my day or something. I don't remember much, but I was hearing what she was saying, but I would go to answer and say something completely different. Almost right away, she began asking if I was high or drunk and what I had taken. I was about to lie and stumble up to my room, because it was apparent that the drug had begun its work, but she called my bluff, saying I could either tell her right then or she would call the police. I became paranoid and mumbled something about Dramamine or some other medication. I finally decided not to fight it and told her, through much effort, that I had taken a lot of Benadryl. She immediately freaked out and told my dad that we had to go to the hospital. I just went ahead with what they told me to do, and I went home to get some proper clothes on. When I tried to put on a sweatshirt, my phone appeared, and I began texting on it. I believe I was on my phone for 5 minutes or more, before my mom told me that I was texting on the fabric of my shirt. I realized that I was pretty fucked, and I grabbed my stuff and went to the car. For some reason, I grabbed my whole backpack like I was going to go to school. Time was completely off, and I couldn't even tell what I was doing half the time. We arrived at the ER, and we waited in the waiting area for what felt like hours. I began to see people I recognized in the lobby. This included teachers from school, coworkers from work, friends and people I didn't like. The way DPH manifests itself is usually through unpleasant memories, such as people you don't like. I felt like everything was normal. We finally got to talk to some people in charge, and I was just kind of staring around, tired, and confused. I was so over this shit already. I had no idea what was to come. At this point, I began pestering my dad and asking him when we'll be leaving the hospital, thinking we'd only be there for a few more minutes. It's at this point that my memory kind of blanks out, but I do remember kind of stumbling around like a confused old man, with my AirPods in and my backpack on my back, from room to room getting evaluated by various doctors, nurses, and other officials. I also remember being stuck with quite a few needles and IVs. This hurt, and in my delirious state, I tried pulling them out, only to get yelled at by the doctors and nurses. I think I must have talked to 5 or 6 different people in different rooms, and the way this part of the ER was set up, all the doors to the previous rooms looked the same. This would have been pretty confusing sober, so you can only imagine how I must have felt while under delirium. I kept walking out the wrong door, and eventually I had a few people watching me to make sure I didn't wander off. Again, my memory sort of cuts off at this point, but a little while later, it had probably been about 2 hours since I took the DPH, I remember sitting on an uncomfortable hospital bed, somewhere deep in the facility, hooked up to an IV machine, confused, scared, and annoyed, because I just wanted to go home and didn't understand what was going to happen. My dad was in the room sitting in a chair to my right, and I continued to beg and plead with him, asking when we were going home. I just couldn't comprehend the fact that I would not be going home that night. There was a doctor outside the room looking in through a small window, and he seems to be very rude towards me, which I can now perceive as frustration because I was acting like a stupid old man and kept wandering off. After sitting on the bed for what felt like a few hours, probably 20 minutes, I decided that I had to take a shit, and began to get up from my bed while still connected to the IVs and various monitors. Immediately, the doctors came in and began to yell at me again. I was confused, scared, and a little annoyed at him and the other personnel because they were holding me down and wouldn't let me use the bathroom. It was at this point that I looked up at my dad, and I think his head spun around upside down. Then his face turned into the face of one of my friends, and then I became convinced that my friend was in the room with me. A little while later, a nurse came in to help calm me down, and I was convinced that she was one of my high school friends. My memory blanks out once more after that, and next thing I knew, I was in a private room in the intensive care unit. Apparently they had to sedate me because I was becoming restless and in my state of delirium, concerning enough for the nurses and staff to have to put me to sleep temporarily. I was told later by my parents that I was in this state for over 4 hours and didn't end up falling asleep until 2 in the morning. For reference, I took the DPH around 8 p.m. The next day, I was still in shock that I was stuck in the hospital and kept convincing my parents that I needed to leave, and asking every single nurse and doctor and person with a name tag whether or not I was leaving that day. I spent the next 2 days in that room, with a nurse watching me and 2 large machines pumping fluid in and out of my body. I couldn't leave the room and could only get out to use the bathroom, but I did have a flat screen TV with every channel and a built-in remote in the bed, so it wasn't entirely horrible. A few days later, I was transferred to a sister hospital with an inpatient psychology program. Apparently they thought I was trying to commit suicide and wanted to make sure I was okay before releasing me. After talking with many people and sitting in a jail-like environment which really had a toll on my mental health, I was released and returned to the normal world, to which I was ecstatic. It was enough to convince me to stop binging on DPH, and in addition made me stop and not take simple things for granted, like the ability to do what you want and live a normal, peaceful life. I hope those who take the time to read/listen to this report are able to gain some wisdom from it, and avoid making the same mistakes that I did. Anonymous.